Sickle cell disease. So sickle cell, so first of all, one of the main things you need to know that is that sickle cell disease is affecting our red blood cells. Okay? So something different is happening in individuals who have sickle cell disease. One, the appearance of the red blood cells is different than those who have normal blood cells. And in this picture, you can see that the red blood cell is sickle-shaped. And you can imagine being different from the normal red blood cells, which are round and biconcave. When the normal red blood cells come in contact with each other, they kind of just slide by one another. But with sickle cells, you can see where that may not happen. Instead of just sliding by another red blood cell, it may hook onto it, causing clumping. Okay? So that would lead to clots. So sickle cell disease is hereditary, and that HB means hemoglobin. So it's a defect of hemoglobin that occurs mostly among people of African descent, and it's caused by a recessive allele. You may remember what those are. Remember alleles? So for our genes we have alleles, and I'll get into that in a moment. And that recessive allele, if we have two of those, then that will change the structure of our hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is what type of molecule? It's a protein, right? So hemoglobin is a protein. So that protein is altered, and that will result in the hemoglobin not having the right shape. That's basically what's happening there. All right. Hemoglobin does not HBS, and that's when the individual has sickle cell. Their hemoglobin doesn't bind oxygen as well. So that's where the anemia part comes into, sickle cell anemia. So because of the change in the shape of the hemoglobin, the oxygen is going to have a harder time binding to the hemoglobin that's in our red blood cells. Therefore, the red blood cells become rigid, sticky, and pointed at the ends, which makes them clump together, and they'll block small blood vessels. So as they try to pass through a narrow blood vessel, they can't get through it now. It can cause intense pain. And it can lead to kidney, heart failure, stroke, rheumatism, and even paralysis. All right. So I wanted to, for a moment, because usually I'll have a question or two on the test, where I'll ask you if a couple wants to have children and they know that each of them has the trait. So questions like that will be on the test. What is the probability that their child, if the woman is pregnant, if that child will have sickle cell disease? Okay, so this is how you do it. So you have to go back to the alleles, the punnet square, right? So if you all remember, so for each trait, we have two alleles, right? So we have how many chromosomes in our cells, in our regular body cells?
Together is 46, right?
Right, 23 pairs or 46 chromosomes. And where are these chromosomes? Where are the chromosomes? Where are our chromosomes? What particular part? In our cells, right? Right? Ooh, biology 103. We need to go back. So the DNA, right? That's what our DNA is. So that's located where? In what part of our cells? The nucleus of our cells. So all of our body cells have 46 chromosomes, 23 pairs of chromosomes. So when we say 23 pairs, that means 23 came from one of your parents, the other 23 came from your other parent, right? So for all of our traits, we get half of our chromosomes from our mother, half from our father. So that's what these represent. So for sickle cell disease, there are 2 alleles involved in determining whether we have sickle cell disease or not. So these are the possible combinations. And what I'm using N for is normal. So if you have one of your alleles is an N, that means one of your parents gave you a normal allele for sickle cell or normal hemoglobin. The S represents abnormal, an abnormal allele. So if your mother gave you an N and your father gave you an N, you would have the 2 normal alleles. Therefore, your red blood cells would be what? Normal. Good. So if one of your parents gave you an N, the other parent gave you an S, you would have 1 normal and 1 sickle cell allele. So you would have a sickle cell trait, okay? Which would mean you're a carrier in essence. That means your offspring could get one or the other once you have a child. And if you have both of your parents to give you an S, that's when you're going to have sickle cell disease. Okay, so let me do the Punnett square for you. I know this has been some time for you guys. So just a reminder. So what we're going to do here, so the question I asked you before, let's just say your mother has sickle cell trait and your father also has sickle cell trait. So if they have sickle cell trait, you know their 2 alleles are what? Is NS, SN, doesn't matter the order. So my question is, if this couple is having a child, what is the likelihood that that child they have will develop or will have 2 S's is basically the question. Okay, so how do you know? So what you all learned about the Punnett square is each parent, you would have to put their alleles either on the side. So one parent you have on the side, the other parent, their alleles go across the top. Doesn't matter which, just be consistent. Okay? And so the law of segregation tells you that the probabilities can be determined this way. It's not perfect, but it's likely that the probabilities will fall in this range. So for this box, you just put in the letters adjacent to that box. So here, what would we put?
NS.
So we would put NS here, the S and the N. And what would we put here?
NS.
So we would put NS here.
SS.
So here, that S, and then above you have another S. Okay? So what's the answer to that question? So, and here's the thing, I can ask you on the test, what is the probability that 2 parents that have the trait that their child will have sickle cell disease? So the answer will be what?
25%.
So they have a 25% chance of the offspring having the disease. Okay? I can also ask you, what is the probability that their child will also have the trait? 50? How many say 50? Right? Because each box is 25%, right? 25, 25 to make 100. So you have 2 with NS. So that means they have a 50% chance of having the trait. And what about the probability that the child will be normal? 25%. Okay? Y'all got that? All right, so you should be able to answer number 1. So if both parents have a trait, what is the probability that the child will have sickle cell? We'll just answer that. What if one parent has sickle cell disease and the other parent is normal? What is the probability that their child will have the disease? 75%. So one parent has the disease, 2 S's. The other parent is normal.
100% they have a trait and 0% they have disease.
Right. You all get that? So here's the thing to look at. When you think about what these alleles are doing, or where they're coming from, that should help. So if one parent, let's just say the mom is normal, and dad has sickle cell disease, what do these represent? So if one of your parents has 2 N's, you're going to get one of those letters, right? Her fertilized egg is going to have one of those. And really, that's all we're talking about, the probability. So 100% of her eggs will have 1 N. So what about the sperm? 100% of the sperm are going to have 1 S. Whereas the other way, if they have the trait, 50% of her eggs are going to have the N, the other 50% will have the S. And the same with the sperm. So it's by chance which of the, so if it's the trait, you're looking at what is the probability that that particular sperm has the S or the N. And then that's where you go to the punnet square to help you figure that out. Okay, so you put the 2 N's again here on the side, 2 S's on top, and you see that all of the children are going to have at least what, 1 N and 1 S. So the first part of the question, what is the probability the child will have the disease? 0%. And the trait? 100%. And normal? 0%. Okay. So now one parent has the trait and the other has the disease. What is the probability of their child having the disease?
50%.
So one parent has the trait, the other has the disease. So if we change this to NS, and we change this to NS, what do you end up with? So you end up with an NS, what here? SS, SS. So what is the probability that the child will have the disease? 50%. And what is the probability that the child will have the trait? 50%. And now you can look up here and figure that out. Dad has nothing to give but what?
The disease.
The disease, the S. So now we're counting on, there's a 50% chance the mother will give the N. There's a 50% chance that she'll give the S. Okay? All right, so you should see a couple of questions on the test related to that.
So I got a question. In reality, it's likely like if the parents both have the trait, that their kid will have the disease.
It's 25% chance. So for each child, it's a 25% chance. It's like flipping a coin, almost. It's not like, and I've heard of some couples who have the trait, that they may have 4 children and 3 of them have the disease, but that 25% means for the one pregnancy. Okay, so for the one pregnancy, that child has a 25% chance. Okay. All right, so let's see here. So these are just a few other details about the pathophysiology of what effects may occur in people who have sickle cell disease. Okay. Okay, so the blood types, when we say blood, our blood type is A or B or AB or O, what exactly are we talking about? So again, we're looking at alleles, so our blood type is determined by the alleles passed down to us from our parents. And so most traits are going to involve two alleles, and that will determine what our blood type is. But for some traits, there are more than one type of allele, or more than two different types of allele. And with ABO blood types, that is the case. There are three different possibilities of alleles. So the alleles for blood type are A, B, and O. Each person has two of the three alleles. So even though there are three different possibilities, each of us only gets two, one from our mother, one from our father. Okay? Now, so first what we want to look at is the difference between dominant and recessive. So if we say the A, so these are the types of alleles, A, B, and O, are the three different types of alleles that are out there. But again, we get two of those. And so the A and the B are dominant alleles. And the O is the recessive allele. So what does that mean to you? So if O is recessive and you match O up with an A, that means what? Right, so that means the A is dominant, so the A is what is expressed. So if you have a dominant, if you remember, if you have a dominant allele with a recessive allele, the dominant allele is the one that's always expressed, right? So in order for the recessive allele to be expressed, you have to have both recessive alleles. Very good. So you all are remembering this stuff. All right, so on this chart, I'm showing you the allele combinations. And so the allele combinations for a person whose blood type is A, you know, they would either have to have an A from each parent, so they would have two A's. Anybody with two A alleles, you know their blood type is A. But if a person has one A and one O allele, their blood type is also A, because A is what? A is dominant over O. Same with B, so the B is dominant as well. So if you have two B's, your blood type is B. If you have one B and one O, your blood type is also B. What about AB? Oops. So if your blood type is AB, since A and B are dominant, neither one overrides the other, they're both expressed. So that means the person's blood type is going to be AB. And then finally, if the blood type is, or the two alleles are O, then you know the blood type is going to be what? The blood type is O. And you really need the two O's there. All right, so that's how blood type is determined. Now, and before we get to the next thing, every now and then, I usually have a question or two asking about paternity. So if you have, let's just say a child, and this is before DNA, this is the way they would try to determine paternity. If a woman had a child and she wasn't sure who the father was, at one time all they could go on is the mother and father's blood type to try to figure out who the father of the child was. So based on this, let's see, I might say child. So if a child has a blood type of A, okay, we can't see their alleles. All we know is their blood type. So if the child's blood type is A, and the mother's blood type is B, and let's just say the man in question, husband, the husband's blood type is AB, and the ex, her ex, has blood type of A, and the mailman, I would say UPS, UPS man, has a blood type of B, and who? The preacher? Oh. Blood type is O. So, who from this list could be excluded from paternity? Well, the first thing you want to look at is just the mother and child. And if you can, try to figure out what their alleles are, especially the mother. Okay? So in order for this to happen, you may be thinking, if the mother is B, how can a child be A? So you know the mother must not be what? She can't have two B's. Otherwise the child would have a B. So the mother must be what? BO. So the mother's alleles are BO. So that means the child must be what? A. Must be AO. So we know the child got the O from mom. So now all we're looking for is an A in one of these men. So who can we exclude?
The preacher.
Thank God. So let's exclude him. UPS man, he can't have an A because it will be out there. Can we exclude this guy?
No.
Can we exclude this one?
Yes.
We can?
Yes, because she don't get a B, she just get an A.
The child? So we've already said the child has an O from the mother. So now all we're looking at is who gave the child that A, because the mother didn't give the child an A. So both of these men have an A. So these two cannot be excluded. So yeah, so you can't. So on the test, the question is usually who can be excluded. Yeah, because you more than likely it's going to be more than one option. All right, let's do one more. Let's say say the child is O, and the mother is O. It makes it a little more difficult. Or not really. Because you know the child has what, two alleles? So the child has two O alleles. So one came from the mother. We know the other must have come from the father. So who can be excluded? The husband, right? Because the husband doesn't have an O. What about the others?
The preacher?
No.
The others could have an O.
Yeah.
Right? So we don't know what their alleles are, all we know is their blood type. So the X could be AO, and the UPS man could be BO. So the only person that can be excluded here is the husband. Okay? Y'all got it? All right. Let's take a quick break.